Welcome to the first semester of Art Appreciation. In this semester, we'll be showing you the different forms of European art, or Old World art. While there are hundreds and hundreds of painters that could be illustrated, we're going to try to show those that have had the most influence or have become the most popular. We will go through the different nationality of painters, starting with the Italian and Renaissance, and moving on to French, German, Flemish, Dutch, Spanish, British, the group called the Impressionists, and a few others at the end. While this is not meant to be a complete course, by the time you are through, you will have a better understanding of how art developed, who influenced people throughout the ages and into our own country, and hopefully have a better appreciation for the creation that God has put before us and was illustrated by the various artists. Sandro Botticelli, born 1445 and died 1510, Italian painter of the Florentine school, perhaps the most poetic of the great Renaissance artists. He had his own studio by age 20, profited from the study of other masters, and in 1475 he entered into the service of the Medici, and his art shows the effect of humanism and classical culture of this environment. In 1481 to 82, he spent time working on the Sistine Chapel in Rome with other artists. 1490 showed the triumph of religious enthusiasm over the happy sensuousness of the Renaissance in his art. His last works express melancholy and suffering with dramatic intensity, as in the Crucifixion. Botticelli creates a distinct type of human beauty to the exquisite character of which some personal sadness of outlook seems to be transmitted. In composition and detail, he shows an unrivaled poetic invention. The delicacy of his art is accomplished by dynamic, linear energy and dramatic power. Virgin and Child with Two Angels. Figures appear almost statue-like. Real human emotion is missing. The focus of the picture is Mary, done in brighter colors. She is looking down in thought, while the other three figures are looking to her. Portrait of Giuliano de' Medici. The Medici family, prominent rulers in Italy, were sponsors of Botticelli. This portrait shows Giuliano as aristocratic. Prominent features: long aristocratic nose, strong chin, an aloof stare. St. Augustine. Botticelli now maturing as artist. Facial features more lifelike. Resembles the work of Michelangelo. This is a close-up or detail of St. Augustine. Here's an example of Botticelli's fresco work in the Sistine Chapel. Again, figures represent authority with rigid faces and little feeling. Primevera. Botticelli was heavily into mythology. This picture shows the Garden of Venus. Here Venus plucked 3 golden apples she gave to Hippomenes so that he might win his race over Atalanta. We see the characters of Venus, Cupid, the 3 Graces, Mercury, Flora, Chloris, and Zephyr. This is detail of the 3 Graces. This is detail of Flora, Chloris, and Zephyr. This is probably Botticelli's most famous painting, The Birth of Venus. The figures look porcelain-like. Painting tells us how Venus sprang from the sea. Zephyrs waft her to the shore, where one of the Graces, Chastity, stood ready to wrap her in a beautiful mantle. The Zephyrs are godlike creatures of the air, clad in azure color, which in Christian symbolization was associated with the breath of the Holy Spirit. They represent the spiritual motivation of ideal love. The yellow hair of Venus stands for the radiance of divine revelation. Chastity, clad in white, with the myrtle sacred to Venus about her neck, would cover beauty with the cloak of modesty befitting love in its earthly manifestation. Pure beauty, in its naked heavenly essence, we do not see on earth. It is revealed to us only in its outward show, the purple mantle of art and God's creation. Detail of Venus. The best way to recognize Botticelli's works is like what was mentioned before, the porcelain look to his creatures, just like china dolls. His type of figure painting stands out among his other contemporaries. Michelangelo Buonarroti, 1475 to 1564. Was a sculptor, architect, painter, poet, one of the greatest and most universally gifted of artists. He was from the Florentine school. He was an artist's apprentice at age 13. For a while went to Rome at age 21. Returned to Florence and worked on a statue of David from a block of marble that had been discarded as spoiled, and was chosen to paint frescoes in a chapel to complement some work done by Leonardo da Vinci. Probably disliked Da Vinci personally, but also probably learned a new energy of movement and intensity of expression from his work. He was summoned to Rome by Pope Julius II to decorate the vaulting of the Sistine Chapel. Though reluctant, he accepted the challenge, and in an astonishing short space of time, working without assistance and under most difficult conditions, painted the famous ceiling that is one of the wonders of art. He had painted on his back 60 feet off the ground, and yet the figures appear life-size from the floor. It interprets the creation of the world and man, and the fall, and the flood in 9 great compositions. He was 37. To the wonderful list of his achievements must be added his superb drawings and sonnets. He died in Rome, but was reburied in Florence. He is considered one of the great 3 during that time period, along with Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. One of Michelangelo's most famous sculptures is called the Pieta, a deep work of Christian piety. It expresses Michelangelo's belief that physical beauty is a manifestation of a noble spirit. Detail of the Pieta. Another close-up detail of the Pieta. A few years ago, a crazed person went and chipped away part of the statue, but it has been restored since that time. Michelangelo's statue of David epitomizes the Renaissance civic virtues of force and anger. Ready for action, the youth looks guardedly to the left, a reflection perhaps of the medieval belief that while the right side is protected by God, the left is open to evil. Michelangelo made Moses a penetrating character study rather than portraying the prophet and lawgiver at some historic moment in time. The intelligent face, with its intense gaze, furrowed brow, and tightly set lips, proclaim him to be a man of action, power, and potential wrath. The strong and sensitive hand, by contrast, bespeaks the more relaxed and contemplative side of his nature. Instead of having light beams radiating from his head, as the Old Testament describes him, he has horns reflecting a mistranslation in the Latin Vulgate of the Hebrew word for light. Detail of Moses. Michelangelo's most famous work was that of the Sistine Chapel. Here we see some preliminary drawings of the figures that he used as he painted his scenes on that ceiling. He took great care to make sure that every body movement and motion was the way he wanted it, and did many studies in the human anatomy to get exactly what he was aiming for. One of the best known scenes from the Sistine Chapel is when God is creating Adam, where God's hand is touching Adam and giving him life. Now we will show you a series of some of the scenes that are found on that Sistine Chapel. Here is a detail from the flood. This is detail from the fall of man. A close-up of Eve from the fall of man. Detail from David and Goliath. Detail from separating the waters from the earth. A close-up detail of one of the faces on the figures. Detail of the Delphic Sibyl. Close-up of the face of the Delphic Sibyl, who the Greeks considered to be like a prophetess at the Temple of Apollo. Michelangelo did mix some mythology with some of the decorations that he put on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. This picture of the Sistine Chapel gives you a little bit of perspective of the depth of this work. You can see the various frescoes all over the sides of the walls and on the ceiling. Directly in the back of this picture is a depiction of the Last Judgment. Another scene to give you an idea of the depth and complexity of this work. Every bit of space that could be used as a canvas was filled with some sort of scene or some sort of figure, so that as you look at the whole complexity of the Sistine Chapel, is one magnitude of scenes from the Bible, figures, movement, color. And to think that he did all this work, generally most of it by himself, is amazing, and in the short amount of time that he actually did complete it. A movie was made on this called The Agony and Ecstasy, about how Michelangelo battled the Pope on how he was to depict these scenes. Raffaello Santi, or Sangio, known as Raphael, 1483 to 1520. He was from the Roman school. He was an apprentice at an early age and studied under several famous artists at the time. He took many of their techniques, but new ideas were infused into his works when he came into contact with Michelangelo and Da Vinci. He painted classical scenes with grandeur. Raphael produced a tremendous amount of work in such a short lifespan. He and his assistants produced frescoes rivaled only by Michelangelo. He had a profound influence on future artists such as Rubens, Poussin, and Rembrandt. Along with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael rounds out the three greatest artists of the Renaissance. Saint Cecilia, the altarpiece of Saint Cecilia detail. Raphael used color delicately and so eloquently marks the transition from light to shade. He had a natural skill in building up the composition of a picture. He had a rare gift for exploring the secret places of the human soul. He had an eye for the ideal beauty. It was beauty at its highest, devoid of human feeling. There is a certain loveliness in his portrait of Saint Cecilia. St. George and the Dragon, a favorite theme of artists. Raphael's is the most popular. His background landscape is tempered enough to provide a setting but not distract from the main focus. In the background, the lady awaits the outcome of the battle. attention is drawn to the combatants by the glossy look of the armor and animal skin. The broken striped lance shows how fierce the battle is. The white horse provides a buffer between the color of the dark knight and the dragon. The eye is immediately drawn to the conflict. Notice the head of the horse doesn't appear to be proportional to the body. Here is another painting by Raphael of the same subject, St. George and the Dragon. Vision of a Knight. Born in the same year as Luther, knights were a popular subject. The figures form a circle completed by the tree in the background. The darker blues and reds keep the eye focused on the circle. The background is muted so to give a setting, but not to distract. Portrait of a Cardinal, detail. This is an example how Raphael could focus attention on the face. The head is surrounded with darkness. The red cap and cloak help draw attention what lies between. The face is excellently highlighted with shadows on the left side. The composition of the picture draws the viewer to the eyes, which seem to be looking directly back at the viewer. Portrait of Angelo Dani, detail. Again, another fine example of how Raphael was able to draw attention to a face. Notice how dark surrounds the entire face from the cap, the hair on the side, and the black vest-like cloth that surrounds by the neck. Your attention is drawn to the face, and again you can see the shadows on the right side. Plato and Aristotle, the School of Athens, detail. This painting falls more in line with the style of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, but his figures are more lifelike than heroic. His beautiful use of color and swirling outer garments focus the eyes to the figures. Notice the perspective of the stone floor. It makes the figures appear to have a forward movement. Jacopo Robusti Tintoretto, 1518 to 1594. He was of the Venetian school. He had been a pupil of Titian for a short time. He made a number of drawings from cast of Michelangelo's sculptures. He produced a vast output of religious paintings, portraits, and a number of allegorical, mythological subjects. These great works show a never-failing imagination, a wonderfully dramatic sense of movement, space, and lighting in composition, and superb use of color. The effects he observed and utilized in his painted compositions, from focusing light on small wax models grouped inside a box, had a considerable influence on later painters. His art may be looked on as a foundation of that of El Greco. Here we see examples of how Tintoretto prepared for the pictures that he wanted to paint. He did, as most artists do, are studies, seeing what are the angles of the body, how large should they be, what should the proportion be, what about perspective in the painting itself. So before a brush even hits a canvas, a good artist plans how he is to complete his picture before he even starts. This technique of using a square method, of drawing a figure out to see how it will fit into the picture, how it will compare with the rest of the composition, will it be proportioned to the proper parts, is a technique that all good artists should use. For those that have a difficult time drawing freehand, this is a good method to make sure that everything is being done right. So even the great artists, all the way from Tintoretto to Rembrandt to modern painters, use this technique. So they plan out what they are going to do so they can see ahead of time if there is a problem, they can correct it before they start painting. Only in his 20s, he showed the setting by stressing the marked linear perspective created by the two great columns. The extreme illusion of depth converges at the exact center of the far background, first on the boy Jesus, then on a statue just visible at the summit of the rear of the temple. The creation of the animals. A flashing light surrounds the Lord of creation, who soars above an earth from which all shadows have not yet been dispersed. In a sky and a sea densely streaked with phosphorescent filaments, birds shoot through the air, and fish swiftly furrow the waters as if suddenly unleashed by the gesture of their creator. Behind them, the terrestrial animals quietly explore their new created habitat. Figurative elements and landscapes are represented with graphic conciseness, and the force of color and light unfurls in an uninterrupted crescendo, clearly expressive of divine intervention. The apparition of the cross to St. Peter. This is an example of perspective foreshortening. Both the figure of St. Peter and the cluster of angels supporting the cross are placed with extraordinary pictorial breadth along two parallel diagonals. Overcome with awe at the sudden apparition, St. Peter nonetheless does not lose firm hold on the large volume on his lap. The angels position themselves to prevent the huge cross from falling forward. Portrait of a man in gilded armor. The youthful warrior strikes a pose in front of window open to a marine view lit by the glow of sunset, which barely touches the man himself. Considering the meticulously detailed armor, it is obvious the painter was striving for decorative effects, no doubt a request from the patron himself. Notice the effect of the light on the armor. Tiziano Vesalio, or Titian, was born probably between 1488 and 1490 and died in 1576. He was of the Venetian school, one of the great masters of the Renaissance, considered one of the best painters of all times. The mountainous region he came from influenced his landscape backgrounds. He was a student of Bellini and worked with Giorgione. From the sensuous and poetic suggestion of Giorgione, he quickly developed a personal style. His prominence rose when he painted a portrait of Emperor Charles V. He was rewarded with the titles of Count and Knight. Other monarchs soon wanted their portraits painted by Titian. After painting at several different cities, he confined his work mainly to Venice. His work was profound in feeling and characterized by remarkable developments in technique. His method was complex and deliberate. On a solid foundation, in a red earth color, the cooler tones were laid, and films or glazes of transparent color applied at intervals. The artist sometimes softening the effect with finger rather than brush, and adding crisp touches of definition. In this way he achieved his depth of color and feeling of rich material texture. In the style of his old age, a broken richness of color and a preoccupation with effects of light might be called impressionist. Titian died of the plague. How near to 100 years of age is still debatable. Artists he inspired, including Velázquez, Rubens, and Poussin. Sacred and profane love. Seated at the left is a richly dressed female figure with jewels at her waist and flowers in her lap, who represent worldly things. At her right the female figure, untrampled by earthly possessions, holds the burning lamp of divine love. The foreground is filled with eye-catching details: opulent draperies, ripe cherries, lustrous metal, hard stone, and soft flesh. By emphasizing the precise physical qualities of such things, Titian has subordinated the landscape background. He has not eliminated nature. There is much pastoral detail in the scene, but it is clearly subservient to the radiant dual image of feminine beauty. The concert. He may have collaborated with Giorgione, his teacher, on this one. What first strikes the eye is the apparent discrepancy between the way the monk at the harpsichord and the other figures are painted. The precise outline of the monk's left cheek, the drama of his flashing sidelong glance, the dramatic attitude of his fingers poised over the keyboard express an energy and vitality that suggest the hand of Titian. By contrast, the shadowy listeners, whose very characters are ambiguous, for example, is the feathered hat figure at the left a man or a woman? Pope Paul III and his grandsons, Alessandro and Octavio Farnese. At the time this portrait, called the most dramatic portrait yet painted, at the center is the shrewd 77-year-old Pope, advocator of reform and most lavish dispenser of papal favors in the history of the Church. Left, pious Alessandro, who the Pope made a cardinal at age 14. At the right, Octavio, in a posture that reflects not humility, but a fawning plea for privilege. Titian's interpretation seems correct, because Octavio later rebelled against the old Pope. Detail of Pope Paul III with his nephews. Portrait of a man, the young Englishman. Using the white ruffle and gold chain to focus attention on the young man's handsome face, Titian achieves an extraordinary lifelike quality by setting of the warm flesh tones with deeper values of the same tones in the background, by posing the figure in a relaxed, spontaneous attitude, and by catching the subject's gaze as he looks at the viewer. Detail of the face of the young Englishman. Notice again how he seems to be gazing right at the viewer. Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519. Painter, sculptor, engineer, architect, and scientist. One of the world's greatest artists, and supremely the universal type of Renaissance genius. Born out of wedlock, he was raised in his father's household and showed unusual gifts as a youth. He enrolled in a painters' guild in 1472. Before 1481, he began to devote himself to those projects and studies in architecture, hydraulics, mechanics, engineering, astronomy, genealogy, and anatomy, whose diverse nature still arouses wonder. In 1482 he painted The Lady with the Ermine. In 1506 he experimented with an oil medium when he painted the fresco Last Supper. The wall he painted on became damp and it was damaged. His famed Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre in 1911, but eventually recovered. The fame of Leonardo rests on an imagination which variously inspired all his undertakings. He, along with Michelangelo and Raphael, make up the great triumvirate in the Renaissance of painting. Leonardo da Vinci was fascinated with the idea of inventions and designs, and here we see one of his early designs for a catapult. On the left, it is designed for a screw helicopter, and on the right, a parachute. Here is his design for an early flying machine. Dabbling in the engineering for warfare, we see ancient mortar and bombs being blasted from the cannon. Fascinated with the study of anatomy, we see Leonardo's drawing of an embryo. A study in muscle structure. Another study of the muscle system. Anatomical chart of the principal organs and arterial system of the female body. This is a study for an equestrian monument. Took various views of the horse. Lady with an Ermine. This is a portrait of Cecilia Gallerini, who was the mistress of one of Leonardo's benefactors. Leonardo had gone to his residence to play a lute and ended up painting. The woman is holding an ermine, one of the Duke's emblems, but notice how her hand appears to be too large. Tree fresco on the ceiling of his benefactor's castle. An eye-whirling tree of intertwining burrows. It covers 2,880 square feet. At casual glance it appears that there are several separate knots of golden rope in the design, but in fact the rope is unbroken, turning, doubling back, and writhing throughout the whole fantastic pattern. Portrait of a musician. Leonardo met an individual who embodied his ideal of beauty, mainly interested with the face and the use of light falling on its planes. The rest of the portrait is unfinished. Da Vinci's The Last Supper is in very poor condition because of the damp walls that it was painted on, and he didn't have the right technique to preserve the paint. And yet it has come down as one of our most famous paintings throughout history. All the disciples are sitting around the table, wondering, "Is it I, Lord? Is it I?" But the betrayer Judas knocks over salt, and because of this, people have symbolized the spilling of salt as being an evil omen. So the superstition arose that if you would take grains of salt and throw it over your shoulder, the evil would go away. A closer detail of the Last Supper shows just exactly how much of this painting has deteriorated. Mona Lisa. In no other of Leonardo's paintings are the depths and haze of atmosphere more fully recreated. This is aerial perspective at its finest. Yet it is the face that forever holds the eye, and has caused the work to be more often copied than any other. It is probably the most recognizable painting in all the world, and one wonders why this one stands out. Is it because of the facial expression of the woman? Do we wonder, what is she thinking? Who is she? detailed close-up of the Mona Lisa. From this detail, you can see just how fragile these old paintings are. The various lines and cracks in the paint, why they have to be so carefully preserved, why the lacquer over them is removed every once in a while and replaced. It becomes a painstaking ordeal, and only experts qualified to do it will keep them in the condition that they are in now and will be preserved for future generations. This self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci, the only known authentic likeness of him, done in his last years, and it was a red chalk drawing. The next section we'll be taking is French painting. In this section we will not include the Impressionist, which will be taken on in another unit. Jean-Baptiste Simeon Chardin, 1699 to 1779. Painter of still life and middle-class life. He developed a taste for Dutch and Flemish still life, and developed from this kind of subject paintings that were equally distinct from those of the Netherlands. His art, that of a realist in the age of artificiality. He is a modern among the 17th century painters in the largeness of design and the study of light which he gave both to his figures. In later life he took to using pastel, with a structural quality of design admired by the Cubists, and a use of broken color which has been called Impressionist. He combined a love of simple things in which the essence of his genius is to be found, and in his revelation of a profound beauty underlying an apparent simplicity in his art is a parallel to that of Vermeer. The objects here are all quite ordinary. A water cistern, a ladle, a bucket, a jug. But Chardin's treatment of them is unique. Who else in this time would have dared such a simple composition, unburdened with details? Who understood so well the soft diffusion of natural light, the well-tuned composure of a carefully delimited space? Whose textures are so rich, so varied, whose colors interact so perfectly? Chardin had an ability to take an old crock and make it as lovely as a jewel, and could breathe life into it. Chardin always painted from nature. He is believed to have drawn very little, preferring to develop his compositions by brushing color directly onto the canvas rather than by first working them out in a sketch form. The carefully placed objects in his still lifes are defined in space, not by sharp outlines, but by highlights which seem to bring near objects forward, and by shadows that heighten the illusion of depth and shape. The magnificently balanced work shown here contains many such object lessons of Chardin's technique. The silver cup at the left, for instance, is completely shaped by light, its edges almost dissolved into soft shadow. No hard contour is to be found, and the cool, bright metal can almost be felt. Child with a top. Chardin's preoccupation with the subject of still life was considered a career handicap by his friends, because they felt that people didn't want to buy still lifes and he couldn't make as good a living. Whether it was the influence of his friends or whether he felt he needed to expand, he eventually turned to painting people. When he did so, he did it brilliantly. Here you can see how Chardin has laid out this picture perfectly, just like apples on a table. The figure is carefully arranged. The atmosphere is stilled by their intense concentration and Chardin's careful control of light and harmonic sense of color. The subjects give the impression that they share Chardin's understanding of objects. Silence, calm, and order prevail in Chardin's domestic scenes, just as in his still lifes. Chardin never simply catches a subject in motion and arbitrarily stops them. He selects those legitimate instances when people naturally come to rest, if only fleetingly. Here we see at the weary seconds when a young housewife back from the market lays down her bulky round loaves of bread and gathers strength to swing her shopping bag into the cabinet. In almost every one of his pictures, time is arrested, and the viewer becomes momentarily but completely involved with Chardin's subject. Soap bubbles. Just as in the previous picture, Chardin is able to stop time, that moment when that bubble is at its largest. The anticipation of whether it be the little brother standing in the window watching, will it be bigger or will it burst? The viewer's attention is riveted on that moment of expectation. Notice how the use of light and shadows gives the effect that is a real bubble that is painted and that it's transparent. Chardin's self-portrait with spectacles is an example of the pastel type of drawing and painting he did later on in life. Here you can also see his very good use of colors and how they make the figures stand out. Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot, 1796 to 1875, renowned in landscape. He was impressed by John Constable, landscape artist of England. The breadth and directness of his style marked a new conception of landscape in French art. It was long before he sold a picture or obtained public recognition. Late in life, he enjoyed great success, generously sharing its rewards with less fortunate artists. His most popular paintings were often not his best. His work can be divided into three groups: the paintings and studies made directly from nature, the more academic salon pictures with some religious, mythological, or literary element of subject, and thirdly, the souvenirs of the 1860s and 1870s, quickly executed small landscapes of a vaporous charm which tended to become superficial. A benevolent and illustrious bachelor, Corot was a guiding light of 19th century French landscape. Chartres Cathedral. Corot painted this scene in 1830 when revolution was gripping France. The dark clouds may symbolize the gathering dark mood that hung over an otherwise peaceful setting. Critics have wondered why he painted the mound obscuring the church. Florence, view from the Boboli Gardens. Here is a great use of sun and shadow. The trees in the foreground cast shade on the two monks, while the city is brightened by the sunlight. The rectangle patterns in the foreground, along with the dark stone fence, help create the impression of a separation of light. Reaper holding her sickle, her head resting on her hand. The girl seems distantly removed from the work going on behind her. Although at first she seems to be looking at the viewer, she is really contemplating something else far removed from the work at hand. The interrupted reading. What caused this woman to stop her reading? Is she thinking about something she just read? Or is there something far removed from the book that's on her mind? Corot painted several pictures of people with a vacant look. Recollection of Morton Fontaine. Notice the rhythm of the large tree and bent shape of the smaller tree brings a focus to the figures, even with reflections in the water and dominating large tree. The figures in the lower left draw our attention. The Mother Superior of the convent. The use of lines is very evident. The dark black outline of the cape draws us as it narrows toward the head. The red inner garment contrasts with the black and narrows as it reaches the head. The white bib also, in contrast with the black, seems to be leading to the face. When we reach the face, it is shadowed and seems to be hiding from the world in its own solitude. Gustave Courbet, 1819 to 1877. He studied mainly the old masters such as Rembrandt and Velázquez. In defiance of both Romanticism and Classicism, he evolved the idea of realism, asserting, that is, that the painting should consist in the representation of real and existing things. His aim was to interpret the manners, ideas, aspect of our own times. His powerful genius found expression in portraiture, figure composition, and landscape, sensuous paintings of the nude, animal studies, and still life. In technique, he was heavy-handed and opened no new prospect, but a massive genius is always apparent in his work, and the realism, which was his watchword, was inspiring to Monet and the young Impressionist. He is one of France's great artists. Self-portrait with black dog. The triangle outlined by the stick and the dog, the delicacy of the contours, and the similarities between the massed shapes of the group and the rocks demonstrate to what extent the painting has been planned and organized. This is what makes the elegant profiles of the dog and his master, the naturalness of their attitudes, and the quizzical, almost questioning expressions on their face actually moving. Lovers in the Country, or Youthful Emotions. Probably the most popular of Courbet's compositions. The man and the woman, seen in profile, hand in hand, their gaze seemingly turned inward upon themselves and their hopes for the future, have become for a very large segment of the public one of the most familiar representations of the joy of love.
The artist's studio. Courbet's definition of the picture. The first part, give the physical and moral story of my studio. They are people who live on life, who live on death. It is society in its upper echelons, in its lower ones, in the middle stratum. To the right are the friends, the workers, the connoisseurs of the art world. To the left is the other world, of the commonplace, the people, wretchedness, poverty, wealth, the exploited and the exploiters, the people who thrive on death. The figures in the pictures represent many of the well-known society and political figures of the day. Many people tried to interpret the meaning of the picture, but with little success. Poachers in the Snow. The style and coloring of this picture reminds one of Frederic Remington, the great American Western artist. They use the same color combinations of blue, green, yellow, and white. The use of shadow effects on the landscape and the muted looking foliage. It is not hard to see a likeness in the two artists' work when you make these comparisons. Ferdinand Victor Eugene Delacroix, 1798 to 1863. One of the great forces in 19th century art. His parents died when he was young, and he had to rely much on himself. He was influenced early by Rubens, and he managed to develop an individual style. His creativeness led to many successes when Romanticism first came into use in France, and he was hailed as a leader. In 1832 he visited Spain and Morocco. The color and costume of North Africa excited him and gave him a renewed zest for painting. He had an opportunity others of his time did not have, to decorate buildings on a vast scale. The execution of his projects were left to assistants, and much of his imaginative power was lost to dull color and poor workmanship. His temperament was more suited to the individualistic picture, and his studies of erotic or oriental life, of the ferocity and energy of wild animals, or the richness of flowers seems more truly expressive. Head of a Man. This early study of a model shows Delacroix's firm grounding in neoclassical draftsmanship, but he adds a luminous sense of color in tones and shadows that is wholly original. Virgin of the Sacred Heart. This is a rather awkward composition, and the cherubs are not well drawn, but in the emotional attitudes of the figures at the bottom, the striking silhouettes, and the dramatic lighting, it points to the excitement of his later work. Greece expiring on the ruins of Missolonghi. The grieving, symbolic figure of Greece, dying with her sons at Missolonghi, was bought by the British government. It stirred the hearts of Englishmen, because it was 3 years early at Missolonghi where Lord Byron had died supporting Greek independence. Mephistopheles. For the prologue of Goethe's Faust, Delacroix invented a fantastic winged devil, as muscular as a man, with hideous talons, flying over medieval towns as he cast evil spells. This is detail from Liberty Leading the People. The symbol of the 1830 uprising, Delacroix's Liberty figure, although clearly a symbol, marks a transition from the fleshier, more realistic women of his earlier career to the smooth-skinned, straight-nosed, monumental creatures who will be seen in different dress and settings in later works. A revitalization of his career came when he made a trip to North Africa, and especially Morocco. And here we see a painting of the Sultan of Morocco, which he painted many years after he returned home. This is detail of a self-portrait. Delacroix was once described as thin, delicate, with a rather cold and reserved countenance, but with a simplicity that did not exclude elegance. Whether or not he agreed, he seems to have seen some of these qualities when he looked at himself. Tiger attacking a horse. Delacroix painted several different canvases of animal combat and was able to show emotion in the type of paintings that he presented. Apollo destroying Python. The ceiling mural in the Louvre, which depicts the victory of Apollo and the heroes of old against the serpent Python, is a triumph over awkward space and garnished, distracting architecture. Jean-Henri Fragonard, 1732 to 1806. Painter, draftsman, the supreme virtuoso of 18th century French art. He studied art with Chardin and then Bucher. A successful and immensely productive career was virtually ended by the Revolution. During the last 15 years of his life he ceased to paint. He was a serious student of the masters, Rembrandt, Hals, and Bucher. His range was extraordinary. He could successfully design a composition in a grand manner and paint the most exquisite scenes, as in The Swing. After his marriage and the birth of his children, he showed his appreciation of the charm of childhood. He was a master of every technique: oil, pastel, miniature, etching, wash or crayon drawing. His 500 paintings and thousands of drawings reveal a imaginative personality and a spirit for romanticism. The Swing. Fragonard was commissioned by the Baron de Saint Julien to paint a picture of his mistress on a swing, with the Baron lolling in the grass in a strategic position from which to observe the girl's legs. Originally a bishop was to be pushing the swing, but Fragonard substituted which was to be her husband, who agrees to this whole situation in silence. Originally another painter refused to do the subject. Notice how the hazy background surrounded by dark foliage highlights the pinkish-white girl. The Pursuit. In a series of pictures, Fragonard illustrates the all-absorbing subject which love had become to the late 18th century. The steps an intended lover would take, the pursuit, the chase, the conquest. The scenes were in a garden setting with statues depicting Cupid or Roman goddesses. The Love Letter, one of Fragonard's most bewitching studies of women. The sitter is tall and slender, with an oval-shaped face, unlike some of his nudes who tended to be chubby and featureless. She is sitting at a desk, half turned toward the viewer, clasping a bunch of flowers with a love message which cannot be deciphered with certainty. The exact wording of the message is less important than Fragonard's exceptional ability to portray the state of emotional anticipation in a woman. Woman reading a book. The theme of women reading was a favorite of Fragonard. This painting shows him to have been as much at ease with women in studious moods as with erotic subjects. The white ruff and the beautifully modeled face in pure profile makes this a most appealing work. Its quiet, contemplative aspect was admired by the Impressionists, especially Renoir. The Bolt. The presence of the apple on the table has been interpreted as a symbol of the fall. But there is little doubt about what is really happening in this picture. This is a straightforward seduction scene, treated in a rather lurid manner of an erotic novel. Notice him bolting the door to prevent her any recourse. Times haven't changed when you consider the date rape problems in today's society. Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, 1780 to 1867. Painter and draftsman who favored classicism. Ingres' view of classicism was founded on the works of Raphael. In subject, he was as various as any of his contemporaries. His works including Romantic Moonlight, Dream of Ossian, both antique and medieval themes, paintings of ceremonial functions, religious paintings, portraits, and nude compositions. His exquisite pencil portraits give him an assured place among the world's great draftsmen. Portrait of a young woman wearing a smock and kerchief. The eyes are very distinctive in this drawing. They have a drawing power to the portrait. Yet the longer you study them, the more the viewer is undecided as to whether they are proportionally correct. The shading makes the face appear lifelike. The clothing Ingres drew on the girl was not the customary dress of the day. Portrait of Paul Lemoyne, sculptor. Ingres painted the youthful sculptor with a mark of elegance and fiery eyes. Ingres must have admired the sketch, because when Des Moines sold it. Years later he became angry. He said, "The wretch has sold himself," he cried. Portrait of Alfred Emilion O'Hara. The subject was a sculptor who later managed the Louvre in Paris. He tried to obstruct the progress of the Impressionist painters of that time. Ingres has drawn the pompous, complacent, and condescending court official, conscious of his high office and power. The Bather. Ingres returned to this subject matter frequently with variations. He has captured an accurate form of the human body. If you study where the farthest leg protrudes out from the couch arm, it looks almost too thin, and the angle appears to be incorrect. Portrait of Madame Rivere. Ingres painted this when he was 25. Take a look at the portrait. Under the coils of black hair, the pale face comes wonderfully alive, with the faint pout of the lips, the faraway look in the dark eyes. Yet somehow the moment we try to fix it, the face seems to recede, intangible, sphinx-like, keeping its secret. Portrait of the painter Francois Granet. Ingres' portrait of Granet is almost the only one in which traces of the brushwork can be seen. But he himself said, "The brushwork, however skillful, must not be apparent, otherwise it destroys illusion, brings everything to a halt. It shows not the object represented, but the artist's tactics, not his idea, but his hand." This is a self-portrait of Ingres at age 78. Jean-Francois Millet, 1814 to 1875, painter and graphic artist who came from a poor peasant family. He studied art with Deleuze and Rousseau. After a long struggle to earn a living by paintings of nude bathers and shepherdesses in the 18th century, he found his true vein in the winnower in 1848. He settled in a small village and with his second wife and growing family. Still in poverty, he devoted himself exclusively to the paintings of peasant life, for which he is famous, such as the Gleaners. He was mostly a realist. Millet was a faulty tactician in oils, his paint often being lifeless and muddled in texture, but in pastels, drawings, and etchings, his great powers were fully displayed. He is distinct from his colleagues in the equal importance he attached to figure and landscape, and to convey an essential harmony between them is one of his achievements. The Shepherdess shows one of his earlier works done in pencil. Here we have a self-portrait of Millais done in charcoal, stump, and black chalk. Man with a Hoe. It's Millais' most tragic painting. It has almost terrifying image of a sort of prehistoric brute. It has been described as the woeful Christ of the peasant's eternal pillage, insofar as it sums up the pessimism and stern melancholy of Millais' temperament and outlook. In nature and in life, he said, it is never the cheerful side of things that appears to me. I don't know where to look for it. I have never seen it. Weariness for him was man's sorry state. Detail of Man with a Hoe. Notice the anguish, the eternal thinking that he can never improve on his plot in life. Man grafting a tree. Here we see a simple peasant scene. A man's house in the background. He stands with his family watching his wife and small child. He knows that he must provide for them if they are to exist. And so he's grafting a tree which will later grow and bear fruit. This has often been compared to the first family of Adam and Eve, and of Adam providing for Eve and the children that were to come. The Gleaners, probably Millais' most popular painting. It shows women who are working in the fields. After the major harvesting is done, they get to pick up the residue which is left, much as was in the case of Ruth when she was following behind the harvesters. Here you can get the idea of what kind of work this was for these people. The daily drudgery of trying to earn a living by catching the fallings that others would leave behind. The Spinner. In The Spinner, it's hard to say whether the young woman or the big spinning wheel caressed by the light conveys the stronger impression of life. That he should have lavished so much care on such humble objects, little regarded at the time, can only mean that Millais loved them and respected them for their own sake. Indeed, his interest in traditional crafts is proved by the fact that he collected local pottery. Woman Sewing by Lamplight. Again, here Millais takes one of the tasks regarded as commonplace during the time and adds special meaning to it. In the background you can barely see it, but a child is sleeping, and all that guides her in her work is a dimly lit candle that burns. But she knows that she must provide and take care of her family. His use of light off of her face and off of the garment produces light and shadows that gives more depth to the picture. Bird Hunting by Torchlight. Here it is the hush of night. However, it is a scene of slaughter, a sort of massacre of the innocents, and the light is the kind that dazzles the occupants of a sleeping house who are about to meet their death at the hands of murderers. Millais once said that the painting was based on a childhood memory. When I was a boy, there were great flights of wild pigeons which settled in the trees at night, when we used to go out with torches, and the birds, blinded by the light, could be killed by the hundred with clubs. He was asked, "Have you not seen it since you were a boy?" "No," was his reply, "but it all comes back to me as I work." In the center of the picture, two peasant lads strike down the birds, while in the foreground, on all fours, a woman and boy gather up the bodies, eagerly and feverishly, like criminals afraid of being apprehended. The vivid callousness and brutality of the real world is practically unexampled in Millais' work, and his memory of the slaughter assumes the form of a hallucination, probably rising from the guilt he must have felt at having as a child watched or taken part in a cruel game he little understood. Jean-Antoine Watteau, 1684 to 1721. From a simple start and studying under several artists, he gradually received recognition for his work. Misfortune entered his life, though. He contracted tuberculosis and lost most of his investments due to bad economic conditions. Though he died when he was 36, the work of Watteau is extensive. It comprises in painting three types of subject: the scenes of military life, the pictures of characters of Italian comedy, and gala events of society. He was also able to create beauty in landscapes. Careless in his treatment of pigment, which has sometimes deteriorated, he was an exquisite colorist. His many drawings in black and red chalks, sometimes heightened white, made from life and forming a repertoire of figures for his paintings, are of incomparable beauty in their combined sensitiveness and precision. His paintings had a quality that can only be called musical, and a charm that transmitted itself to later 18th century art, reappearing exquisitely in Fragonard. Ceres, or Summer. Ceres, a Roman fertility goddess, presides over the wealth of the forest, field, and sea in a scene symbolizing summer, from a series on the seasons that Watteau painted for his patron, Pierre Crozat. Its subject and style reflect the influences of the Italian art Watteau studied in Crozat's home. The Dance. Here Watteau devoted himself to a child's world. The youngsters are engaged in that typical activity of childhood imitation. A boy takes the musician's role. One of the girls prepares to show her steps. Watteau is fascinated with their earnestness, the eager and complete concentration with which they throw themselves into their parts. Each child's focus is inward. They are totally absorbed. These are the normal children of the day, but he used it as a scaled-down version of the men and women who populate his love plays or paintings. Woman seated. Grace, finesse, expression, and above all, economy characterize this masterful chalk drawing. The merest strokes evoke the precise flare of the nostril, the exact set of the head upon the neck, the true fullness of the shoulder. A lady at her toilet. Nudes are rare in Watteau's work, perhaps because on the eve of his death he destroyed many of these pictures. This loss is a great one. As this surviving painting shows, Watteau has caught a moment of perfect charm. Mazzatine. Watteau was devoted to the magic of the theater. Mazzatine changed character with the actor who played him. It was not an actor, however, but a friend whom Watteau chose to wear the most typical Mazzatine costume for this painting. Mazzatine is a valet with a quick wit and sharp tongue, but still an outsider. Watteau seemed to resemble him in life. Gilles. Watteau, anticipating death, expressed his feeling in Gilles. The artist clown is surrounded by the world's vices, the other characters in the painting, who represent lust, intrigue, and mockery. He is alone. His hands hang limply down, unable to reach for the last comforts of the world. For him, the play is over. Albrecht Altdorfer, 1480 to 1538, Bavarian painter, engraver, and architect. A representative artist of the German Renaissance, he was noted for his development of landscape as a main pictorial feature, being evidently impressed by the scenery of the Austrian Alps. As well as forest and mountains, he studied effects of light, and being a city architect, his architectural taste caused him to introduce elaborate buildings into some pictures. His most famous work is the Battle of Arbela, in which vast numbers of small figures are set in a lake and mountain panorama. His engravings on wood and copper are second only to those of Dürer. Forest landscape with St. George killing the dragon. Altdorfer was involved with the total concept of the picture. He subordinated details to express his feeling for the power and force of nature. St. George and his dragon are almost obscured by their setting in the primeval forest. Their forms melt into the trees, which are really more important than St. George himself. Battle of Alexander. This picture was commissioned by the Duke of Bavaria. The subject, Alexander's rout of Darius. It's proclaimed on a plaque hanging above the turmoil of battle. Here again man is made secondary, this time to an overwhelming panorama of land, sea, and sky. Although thousands of soldiers are locked in battle, Alexander and Darius are marked by banners to distinguish them from the horde. The human struggle takes place in an area which all nature is involved. Even the sun and the moon battle each other, brilliantly illuminating the scene in cosmic light. This is a detail from the Battle of Alexander. The rest on the flight from Egypt. The inner strength and integrity of Althofer's art enable him to indulge in a wealth of painstaking detail without obscuring the broader outlines or dampening the pulse of life. The background features soar upwards to reveal their full splendor, imbuing the picture with an unreal, dreamlike quality. They are totally unrelated to the unfolding backgrounds of late Gothic painting, and with the emergence of this new cosmos, the law of perspective and spatial construction cease to play a part. The basin of the fountain even seems to lean towards the Christ child as he dips his hand in the water. Organic and inorganic matter blend into each other. The cherubs seem to have climbed down from the ornamental shaft of the fountain, which is pervaded by the same breath of life. The resurrection of Christ. The dawn is breaking with 1,000 voices in heaven and on earth, whose message reaches the plant and spirit world, while slothful humans are still asleep. The resurrection is shown in color and light as the plant world stirs in morning light. Lucas Cranach the Elder, 1472 to 1553. He was a painter and engraver, a pupil of his father Hans. He was court painter to 3 successive electors of Saxony at Wittenberg, of which he was twice burgomaster. Frederick the Wise granted him the crest of a winged serpent with which he marked his work. A friend of Luther and Melanchthon, he reflects in his art the cross-currents of his time, his religious subjects giving place to portraits of the Lutheran circle and to the mythology or allegory popular with Renaissance princes. The nude figures of his allegories are distinct and original in style and charm. His engravings on wood and copper are also distinguished but rare. He had a busy workshop in which he was assisted by his 2 sons, Hans and Lucas the Younger. Martin Luther. This shows the prime mover of the Reformation at age 43. Cranach is known as the portraitist of the Reformation because he memorialized not only Luther, but many other religious leaders during the half-century that he was court painter in Wittenberg. In this and other portraits, Cranach's straightforward treatment of his subjects emphasizes their piety. Another drawing of Luther. Luther as Junker George. This is a woodcut of Luther as Junker George. This is probably the best likeness that we have of a drawing of Luther by Cranach. Johannes Cuspinian, rector of University of Vienna. Kranach's early skill as a landscapist is evident in the background of this work. In later portraits, he concentrated more attention on his subjects, often abandoning scenery. The Holy Kinship. Cranach painted many religious works. Here he has a complex grouping of figures showing the Holy Family and various relatives dressed as 16th century Germans, which was not unusual for a German painter to do. The somber figure at the left may be Cranach himself. Here we see Sybil of Cleve dressed as a bride, and it is apparent the ornate type of dress that the German hierarchy wore during the Middle Ages. Many of these modes of dress were copied by Cranach in his portraits. Judgment of Paris. In Judgment of Paris, Cranach's crowning achievements were his nudes, and the Cranach nude is distinctive indeed. Long-legged, small-breasted, with just a hint of a paunch, she is frankly seductive, her allure enhanced by a wisp of gauze and fashionable hat or a rich necklace. These sinuously shaped sirens must have caused a sensation in their day, for the faces are believed to be recognizable portraits of the court ladies Cranach knew. Yet there was nothing scandalous per se in 16th century Germany about the use of the nude. The upsurge of scholarly interest in classical antiquity, notably its statues, made nudity in art wholly acceptable. Even Erasmus's translation of the New Testament featured naked women on its title page. In Judgment of Paris, the Trojan prince, transformed by Cranach into a stout German in full armor, getting the last bit of advice from Mercury, revamped as an elderly courier. Paris seems dazed by the difficulty of his task to choose the most beautiful of the goddesses arrayed before him. Which will it be? The maid coyly clasping her foot? The one who holds back her arms to display her bosom to its best advantage? Or the shy-hatted girl who just stands there? Will it be Juno, Minerva, or Venus? As the world knows, Paris picked Venus, and she rewarded him with the gift of another man's wife, Helen, and war resulted. In Cranach's canvas, this unhappy outcome merits no notice whatsoever. The artist has been content to capture a single delightful moment in mythological time. Albrecht Dürer, 1471 to 1528, painter and graphic artist, the outstanding figure of the Renaissance in Northern Europe. He was the third of 15 children. He worked for his father, a goldsmith. He completed his training by working for a renowned engraver. He married Agnes Fry, a woman of wealth, and traveled to Italy, where he was influenced by the masters and developed his sense of ideal beauty. In his art there is a balance between the Gothic spirit and Northern craftsmanship and the broad intellectual outlook of the Renaissance. He was unequal in his woodcuts and engravings. His watercolor paintings were superb. His oil paintings included well-done portraits and a number of impressive altarpieces. His final works were 3 books on measurement and perspective, the fortification and construction of towns, and human proportion, a true genius of his time. Praying Hands. A brush drawing on blue grounded paper was intended simply as a preliminary study for an altarpiece. The drawing is finished down to the last detail, because Dürer planned to transpose it exactly in the final oil painting. great piece of turf, an almost photographically precise image of a clump of grass is one of the meticulously done studies of birds, plants, and animals that Dürer made to sharpen his powers of observation. Dürer was fascinated by animals and grasped every opportunity to make realistic sketches. Every joint of the creature's legs and claws is done with precision. This was done in watercolor. Portrait of a young girl. This clearly shows Dürer's control of the line in the crisp rendering of the girl's fine hair and sharp delineation of her features. The Man of Sorrows is a small picture. This exquisite panel was intended for private prayer and devotion. In this painting, the theme of the Savior who has gone through the agony of the Passion. He is holding the instruments of the Passion and is already marked by their wounds. It is merged with that of a Christ as the Man of Sorrows resting by the wayside. He is crouching in the entrance to the tomb, his large eyes turned in sorrow on the onlooker. The profound sadness of his expression seems to show a burning intensity that can barely be contained in the framework of the little picture. It testifies to that individuality of conception to which Dürer's works owe their greatness. The Four Apostles is an example of some of the altar work that Dürer did. These would be two separate panels. The Adoration of the Trinity. Dürer here takes a religious picture of much significance in the Middle Ages. Another one of the altarpieces that he had designed. Here we see the Son who's on a cross on the lap of his Holy Father, above them the dove as with the Holy Spirit. In the layers of people that surround him, we see the people of the Old and New Testament times. The layer below shows the people of the world at the time as he knew it, the common people, the emperor, the pope, and people of the church. Portrait of an old man. This brush drawing shows the intricate detail and fine lines that Dürer the draftsman was able to come up with in this composition. Here he had hired an 83-year-old man as his model so that everything could be as precise as possible. The same man was later used in a woodcut study of St. Jerome in his study. Albert Dürer self-portrait. Here we see him in the medieval dress, his long curly locks, very evident in the picture. The way the light falls on them enhances the picture and surrounds his face. A master at using the very fine detail. Much of it is seen in the clothing and in his person himself. Another self-portrait of Dürer, made when he was 29 and renowned throughout Europe. Frankly idealized into a Christ-like image. It may have been meant by Dürer to remind viewers that an artist's creative spirit is God-given, or as others have thought, it shows his vanity. Hans Holbein the Younger, 1497 to 1543. He was trained by Hans the Elder, his father. Went to Basel, a prosperous German-Swiss city, the center of humanism. He became a naturalized Swiss citizen in 1520. He was a remarkable designer for books. His illustrations for Erasmus's Praise of Folly were as popular as the book itself. He designed the title page for Luther's German translation of the New Testament. He did woodcuts, goldsmith's work, stained glass, and mural decorations. He also developed a method of chalk drawing. He was introduced to Sir Thomas More in England by Erasmus and did drawings of his family. In 1536 he became court painter to Henry VIII and left a painted record of the Tudor family. He was compelled to paint elaborate details of court dress, but his later work is remarkable for an exquisite refinement of line and essential simplicity of design. His other work in England included ornamental design and miniatures. He stands alone in the English school of art. He may be called a great internationalist of portraiture. Portraits of Erasmus of Rotterdam. Erasmus, the great scholar, agreed to sit for this portrait. It shows him standing or seated behind a table surrounded by his beloved books. His thin hands rest on a Greek volume bound in red leather. He is enveloped in a black cloak lined with golden brown mink, for this is the chilly, sensitive Erasmus, who considered himself so delicate yet could endure so surprisingly much. The fine intellectual features, with wide, thin lips, over which a smile is hovering, half mocking and skeptical, half understanding and forgiving, are those of the aging Erasmus at the height of his fame. Portrait of George Chazise. It is a great portrait and a wonderful still life, showing a man in his professional environment. The instruments, books, and papers scattered on the shelves, ledges, and table. The Venetian glass through which Chazise's shimmering silk sleeves are visible. The oriental rug, all these are observed with an exquisite care for detail, without distracting from the mathematical firmness of the central form. Portrait of a young man. Here Holbein concentrated wholly on the human figure set firmly against a neutral background. Nothing is added that might distract attention from the portrayal of the character, which is expressed in the outline and the posture as well as in the hands and face. A man is defined by his bearing. No other painter understood and expressed this as well as Holbein did. His world is a cosmos that is inhabited by man alone, a cosmos in which each individual has his appointed and immutable place. The ambassadors. In meticulous perspective, Holbein included a celestial globe, a lute, Lutheran hymn book, compasses, flutes, and sundial. The most remarkable object painted is a grotesquely distorted pattern which changes when hung over the doorway. At the lower part of the picture it is seen as a slanted mass, but when hung over a doorway and when you look up at it, it becomes a skull, a most remarkable feat for a painter. Portrait of Jane Seymour. While serving Henry VIII, Holbein painted portraits of 3 of the king's 6 wives, an ill-fated series of ladies whose fates are recounted in the couplet, "Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived." Here the third wife, Jane Seymour, died after giving birth to the king's heir, Edward, whom Holbein painted as a child of 2. The Virgin and Child with the family of Burgomeister Jacob Meyer. Holbein, along with Dürer, started a new phase in the art of painting, and that was adding some secularism into religious paintings. And here we see it when he added the aspect of real people into the paintings that were considered religious. Here we have the Burgomeister of a town and his family included in the rendition of the mother and child.